Welcome everyone to our segment 1 class, January 2017. Today, of course, we're going to look at the South Node in Cancer or the fourth house. Here's the housekeeping slides, which I nowadays have a tendency to just put on the screen and then skip right over because most of you are pretty familiar with our free weekly podcast, all our materials put into our Astro Library, and of course the multimedia course, which we have on sale right now, by the way. Free shipping on any segment when you get the materials, binders, DVDs, and I think $25 off if you do the digital only version on segment 1, segment 2.
Kim,
Yep.
just to clarify for people that might want to upgrade to segment 2 or segment 3, yeah, all the materials are being shipped free. So if you get the binders, we'll ship it all free, and you also get $25 off of any of the digital or digital combo packages. Because you remember, you can also choose to have the digital version online and the DVDs shipped with all the binder materials, etc. So you'll save $25 on the digital combo or the digital only using coupon code Aquarius, and you do that, you apply that at checkout. So anybody interested in upgrading, we welcome you to segment 2, segment 3.
All right, thank you, Henny, for knowing the details. Our volunteers have filled out for finishing up this series. And so let's just jump right in with class right away because I'm starting a little late. So when we have South Node in Cancer or fourth house egos, they have been and will be continuing to learn evolutionary lessons of internal security versus emotional security from any external factor. As you can see, it can be anything and everything outside of themselves. Many times, these ego structures are born into familial situations wherein one or both parents produce a variety of emotional shocks that continually force the individual back in upon themselves. One or both of the parents may not recognize or understand the individuality of a South Node in Cancer or fourth house ego, and therefore they have emotional needs which go unrecognized and unfulfilled. South Node in Cancer, fourth house ego structures are always thrown back upon themselves to learn evolutionary lessons of internal security and to minimize any external dependencies. So what happens here is typically in the early environment of this ego structure, as a child, it's mainly difficult due to their sense of individuality or their self-image still being undefined. I mean, this is true for all of us to a certain extent, but it's going to be real emphasized when you have South Node in Cancer or fourth house, because that self-image is being so impacted by the parents and whatever the environmental conditionings are of that childhood environment. In other words, their egos are taking in any messages from their parents and their environment wholesale. There's no objectivity. It just is taken in and adopted. They are conditioned many times by their parents very early on. So most of the South Node in Cancer or fourth house egos have prior life experiences then in which their emotional needs have not been met by one or both of the parents. This will create and trigger unconscious memories in this life. It will create a very similar environment in this life as what they had in previous lives. And they will also see many times it recreates familial environments, repeating that patterning with one or both of the parents due to these unresolved karmic issues. Again, not having their emotional needs met, not being acknowledged for who they specifically are on an egoic or emotional basis. So these prior life associations with these parents then create all kinds of memories that are held at an unconscious level. And that will then result in compulsive emotional behavior patterns, both by the South Node in Cancer or fourth house ego and by the parents as well. They trigger each other. They continue to project all of these emotional patterns and unconscious memories forward. So here in general, when you have the South Node in Cancer or fourth house, there are going to be varying degrees of emotional issues that are directly linked to feelings of not being sufficiently nurtured or appreciated or understood. These famous memory associations from the past are repeated again. It creates an intensity of emotions, feelings, moods. It also will create intense emotional needs. And just as a reminder from the perspective of EA, there's a difference between feelings and emotions. Feelings are more surface. They're an instant reaction to anything going on in the environment. And after that reaction, the emotions kick in. The emotions are the deeper reactions to feelings and that stimuli from the outer environment. Sometimes these prior life experiences can create bottomless pits for these ego structures with regard to how much emotional nurturing is needed to feel secure. So again, this ego structure will typically need a strong amount of emotional nurturing to feel safe in that early environment, to feel secure. And typically, one or both of these parents are not going to be able to give the amount of emotional nurturing that they need in order to have, again, that safety and security. And we can also typically find with that 10th house Capricorn polarity that it is work and career issues that will many times remove one parent, both parents from the environment. So South Node in Cancer or fourth house egos experience an interpretation of their parents' behavior may not match how one or both parents interpret their behavior to the South Node in Cancer or fourth house ego. Segment 2, I went into this a little bit on the DVDs, and then there was an evolutionary astrology conference out in Portland, Oregon. I think it was 2011, in which I did a lecture on this subject with fourth house, 10th house in general, where the signs Cancer, Capricorn fall, the rulers, Moon, Saturn. That lecture, Leroy, can you remember? Is it in segment 3 of the Astro Library? So if you're wanting a little more information on that, again, the segment 2 DVDs, and also you can go do a search on ea.net and uh, what would familial dynamics? You can search that. That'll show you where you can find more information in that regard.
I think it is.
So, as children, these South Node in Cancer fourth house egos do not have an ability to understand what is happening in their world on emotional levels. So they're going to repeat these intense emotional needs as well as the feelings of deprivation, not having their needs met. From an evolutionary perspective, many times this is necessary. We're rejiggling, is that a word? All the emotions and the emotional patterns to make them conscious. And of course, as you remember, in general, the south node is going to be the ego structure that's been created in past lives for the natal Pluto, whereas Pluto, or the soul, will operate fairly unconsciously. The south node ego structure in general is always trying to make everything conscious again. We know these patterns. If you just reflect for a moment on wherever your south node is by sign and house, you know that energy. And yes, this ego structure has unconscious emotions and patterns hanging out there, but as they re-experience them, it's this deja vu. Oh gosh, how come I know this? What does this mean? Why am I re-experiencing all of this again? Sometimes this ego structure will incarnate into an environment where one or both of the parents will dominate the life of these egos. They can have a parent or parents who do not allow them to grow up. They can have parents that manipulate overtly and or very covertly on subtle basis. And if it's covert, it will almost come with the subtle guilt patterning as well, making these sensitive egos feel bad if they're not behaving the way the parent wants them to. They may also have parents that want to assert their own emotional needs, and especially if they have unfulfilled emotional needs, they can easily project this on to these ego structures as children. Again, not even being able to acknowledge the child for who they are. So typically when we have these dominating parents, they cannot recognize the emotional needs of their own child. Sometimes this will go to an extreme where we'll have parents or parent manifesting cruel, abusive behavior in its absolute extreme, then it will take on the form of incest. So the real lesson then that happens with this is to internalize security. And this will typically happen as this nodal structure matures. And this is where we start looking at that north node in Capricorn or the 10th house. Sooner or later, they're going to become an adult, even if there is a wounded inner child running around. But as they mature out there into that world, they're reaching for an ability to objectify why their early environment took place like it did. And they're also looking for an ability to objectify the karmic lessons and those patterns that they have with one or both parents or even step parents. Even though we're not saying this many times, you can have all of everything we're describing here can be situations and patterns with step parents as well as biological parents. So many times when we have these unmet emotional needs, it will translate into emotional displacement. Now, if you think about this for a moment, all of us have a fourth house. We're going to have a sign of the zodiac on that fourth house cusp. We're going to have a moon in our chart. We're going to have the ruler of the sign on the fourth house. This is going to be the early environment. And according to those details, if in general, if our emotional needs weren't met at a young age, we're going to then project into adulthood all of our emotional displacements. Not just South Node in Cancer or fourth house. This can be true for all of us. And so, in general and specifically then, when we have that South Node in Cancer or fourth house, they're going to tend to form relationships in adulthood in which they unconsciously expect emotional needs to be met by another person, to be met by a partner. When we have emotional displacement, the emotional needs are like those of a child, even as an adult. Others may treat them as children and not allow them to grow up. There can be prior life and current life childhood pains and emotions that then get projected on to partners. And the closer the relationship, the more intense the projections and the expectations, meaning more projections will be made upon a marriage type partner than anybody else. I remember in general, this is making me flash, my father was the Pluto in Cancer generation. And so we can relate to a lot of this just from that Pluto generation. Um, he unexpectedly lost his mother right at 13, 14. He was also experiencing a Saturn opposition. He unexpectedly uh, lost his mother uh, basically at the hands of his father and beating her. And the family minister swept it under the rug. Today, my grandfather would have ended up in jail. And my father was emotionally arrested from that point onward. And I remember being a young adult, way before I knew anything about evolutionary astrology, and eh, being in high school and going, my dad's not normal. And having that recognition, and I didn't know about this. I did not know how my grandmother died till I was in my mid-20s. We were told she died in childbirth. And I just remember that distinct aha moment in the family kitchen where I realized how emotionally disturbed my dad was. He was a rageaholic. To his credit, he did a 180 turn from his father. He never ever physically abused his wife or his three daughters. But that emotional displacement, even though I didn't know that word for that, I was so aware of it growing up. And that had its effect on me as well. Again, not having this ego structure or being Pluto Cancer or fourth house, but you get the point in general of what I'm saying here. And again, this can be so emphasized with this ego structure right here. South Node in Cancer or fourth house egos may draw in partners with a psychological makeup similar to their own parents. And this almost always happens in their first relationships as young adults. And this is basically an unconscious attempt on emotional levels to recover any of these unmet emotional needs from childhood. However, the displaced emotional needs will still go unmet when they attract a partner just like their parent. How many of us do this in general in many ways as well? I married my father. I married my mother. So the emotional evolution in all these variety of ways we're looking at for this ego structure will always throw the ego back in upon itself in order to internalize security. And this cycle will repeat lifetime after lifetime, relationship after relationship, until the South Node in Cancer or fourth house ego learns to supply their own internal security, and from that to emotionally mature and learn how to meet their own emotional needs. South Node in Cancer or fourth house egos may also manipulate others emotionally to have their childlike needs met. And they can do this until again, they learn that internal security lesson. When this is the case, they can have all of their own emotional tantrums and anger and rage. They can go into that emotional withdrawal. More on that a little bit. They can play all of these moody, emotional games, and they're just very subtly manipulating on emotional levels. Many times, what's under the surface with this is these intense emotions and needs translate into an utter fear of vulnerability. Now, this fear of vulnerability exists on both the Cancer Capricorn polarity. Capricorn will, be they'll suppress and be real tough. And Cancer will become emotional and childlike. And again, both are going to manipulate and both are going to be in denial of this fear of vulnerability. Now, some of this is going to come because both polarities, the Cancer and the Capricorn, are extremely sensitive, including a sensitivity to physical touch. And typically, these are going to be egos that try to deny any sense of vulnerability and any sense of sensitivity. If they suffered any abuse as a child, they can be, completely hands off. They can go from the extreme of, just being real needy on that physical level and just always have to be touching somebody or almost in their lap or, hold my hand and all that kind of stuff. And they can go to the opposite end of that where they put up the wall and do not touch me, do not hug me. That was what happened in my father's case my father not only was Pluto in Cancer, he was Pluto in the 10th house, so he had both Cancer Capricorn active on that soul level. But due to the physical abuse in his family environment, it was don't touch. I did not grow up with my father hugging me. He has he's moved into it over the last few years, but he's in his early 80s. Finally. So the denial of that emotional vulnerability is going to come from lifetimes, including this life, like I was mentioning for my father, lifetimes of emotional shocks, manipulations by families, manipulations by their environment, feeling victimized by the environment. It can come from having that emotional dependency, having that rug ripped out underneath from them when they became very emotionally static in prior lives or this lifetime. And it can come from lifetimes of emotional suffocation or frustration due to not expressing their emotional needs. Again, they just go into complete denial that they have any emotions at all. So when this ego structure buys into that emotional denial, they can also want to dominate others on emotional levels in relationships. The South Node in Cancer or fourth house ego will draw in a partner who's emotionally weaker than them, a partner who has their own emotional displacements going on. These partners will have unfulfilled and unresolved emotional needs from their own parents. And so the South Node in Cancer or fourth house ego will identify wherever the weakest emotional links are in a partner, and they'll exploit it, they'll manipulate it, they'll make themselves the savior for the partner. And so they can become very invested in the partner not growing up, in the partner remaining childlike. So the South Node in Cancer or fourth house ego can have control of the relationship for security reasons. And many times what will happen here is, and this should say ego, they'll keep finding ways to just call the partner out, and something's always wrong with them. Put them down so that they can feel emotionally superior, so they can feel that, they're in charge of their emotional world, even when that includes that emotional denial. And here again, this is very famous for Moon, Cancer, fourth house in general. Emotional denial does not equal emotional security. So South Node in Cancer or fourth house egos dominating their partner, again, guarantees protection of their own vulnerability and insecurity underneath the surface on emotional levels. And when they have their own unresolved anger or rage at their parents or their early environment, they can be the ones to take it out on their partners. They can be the ones to abuse and hurt the partner. And it becomes a very distorted way of getting their own security and dependency needs met. Unfortunately, what happens here, though, is their deepest emotional needs continue to go unmet because the partner is not equipped to meet those needs. We can also have situations from emotional denial where South Node in Cancer or fourth house egos attempt to dominate or control their environment. They will not only attempt to dominate and control partners, relationships, they can do it in their environment as well. And they can do this through verbal or emotional dominance. They can do it through what would be called the silent treatment, the moodiness, the negativity. They're not communicating, but you can just feel that energy coming out of them. And when you really look at it, it's very, very childlike behavior. And what will happen then is they'll get negative feedback from the environment, which is a way to force them back in upon themselves for those internal security lessons. When this happens from their environment, there is the potential that the South Node in Cancer fourth house egos can recognize the inner dynamics that are going on, and they can make the necessary changes however they need to do that. What we can also have, and this becomes quite common, just in general with Cancer, Capricorn, fourth house, 10th house, planets there. Again, it's going to be emphasized with this ego structure, but there can be these emotional reactions where they go back and forth between dominance and dominating. having situations where they dominate, having situations where they are dominated. And they'll go back and forth, where they'll look for people and situations where they will unconsciously expect their displaced emotions to be met. They become childlike. Chances are this is where they will be dominated, and they'll cycle around and seek out people or situations in which they can be the dominating or controlling one to again get their unresolved emotional needs met. So what you see here is this ego structure can have a cycling back and forth between being the child and the parent. And the lesson is always going to be a fully functioning adult. The maturation process, North Node in Capricorn, 10th house. So these alternating cycles can occur within a single relationship, or they can go back and forth between various relationships and different types of environments. South Node in Cancer or fourth house eagles will experience a full spectrum of emotions, moods, feelings, and they will feel all of this quite intensely. And from the perspective of evolutionary astrology, every single one of these emotions are valid. They all serve to help us wake up and mature on emotional levels. Many times these emotions they're going to originate from an unconscious level. And usually there can be some external experience that's going to trigger these unconscious emotions. And so it can appear as though these emotions just come out of the blue, and they can feel out of control with the intensity of all these emotions. They're just swept away by the emotional winds, so to speak. And so they can appear very inconsistent in regards to their emotional expressions and whatever their emotional needs are. They'll feel one way in a moment, the next moment they feel something else, and then they swing to another emotion. And so it becomes confusing to them, and it becomes confusing to their partner as well. However, these intense emotional states must be experienced. Again, it's going to wake up this ego structure to their own self-knowledge. And that helps lead them to their own sense of inner security. They must feel these emotions and these emotional situations on intense levels, because it really helps them understand their own ego structure, helps them understand how they have to learn how to meet their own emotional needs. That creates inner security. That allows them to move over to the North Node in Capricorn or 10th house and evolve and mature. And then as they do this, they can be a source for helping others do the same thing. So what we're going to find with this ego structure, and this is another principle that is general to the moon, Cancer, and the fourth house. And that is that this archetype and this ego structure on the South Node has two distinct emotional cycles, withdrawn and animation. And when they have these emotional triggers that have them close in upon themselves, the withdrawn part of the cycle, They just want to crawl in their cave. They want to be left alone. This is where they do become silent. They do close down. And that intensity of being drawn inside themselves then allows them to focus on where these emotions are coming from. The unconscious or subconscious comes up into consciousness, even to the point that they can have memories pop into consciousness, memories from early childhood, memories from past lives. They can, oh, yeah, this is it. This is what's going on. This is why this is happening. And once they figure out the origin of the emotions, why this was triggered, what's there as the lesson, I like to say, as they then reestablish a sense of emotional homeostasis, they flip back over into the animation cycle. And the animation cycle is where they want to process these emotions with somebody. They want to talk about them. They want to emote. They want to feel. They want to share. Uh, Again, they're now activated and animated again, and they're ready to talk. They're ready to touch. They're ready to go through it and process with whomever they need to. Now, the major thing to understand is that these withdrawal and animation cycles are natural. They are unpredictable. You never know when something's going to come along and they get triggered. And this will be even more deeply felt when you have the South Node in Cancer or fourth house. Again, we all experience this because we all have a moon, we all have a Cancer house cusp, planets in Cancer or fourth house, but it is more intensely felt when you have that South Node in Cancer or fourth house. What are we talking about? The South Node of the moon. This is where it's going to be felt the most intensely on emotional levels. This is withdrawal animation cycle. It will be felt more deeply here than any of the other 11 South Node ego structures. And of course, we can have all kinds of emotional confrontations and problems when other people in their environment do not understand this emotional cycle and this natural emotional cycle. This lack of understanding can lead other people to attack or confront this ego structure when they are in a very necessary withdrawal cycle. It can trigger the partners. They feel emotionally defensive, insecure, or threatened. And so it can interrupt that natural processing that these ego structures are trying to do. And we can flip this around. We can have the opposite when these ego structures become animated. They can have a partner that could be going through a withdrawal cycle. And these ego structures want to emote, they want to process, they want to talk about it, and the partner is not in a space to be able to hear or understand or feel. So just this simple concept. In all my years of clients with astrology, anytime I've seen, Cancer, fourth house, or lots of moon aspects, I almost always, in general, explain to the client this withdrawal animation cycle and tell them how important it is to verbally express this with their partner and understand when one or both of them go through these cycles, and to really honor that withdrawn cycle as best as possible and be patient and wait until they themselves, the partner, are ready to process through it. And of course, the host sensitivity to touch becomes involved as well. Sometimes when somebody's very triggered and they are in that withdrawn state, sometimes it's not about the words. It can be as simple as going up and giving them a silent hug, coming up to them and just giving them, a simple touch, you know, giving them a little back rub, rubbing their shoulders. Just that can be a natural way to be supportive of the withdrawn cycle without coming through and demanding conversation and explanations and reasons why and all of that kind of stuff going on. You know, I'm a Capricorn rising. I have a partner, Leroy. He has a Cancer rising. We're opposites of that with that Cancer Capricorn thing. And so we've both learned that over the years, just with our ascendant descendant, that sometimes when one of us is triggered, it's as simple as just giving the other person a hug. Uh, Recently, Leroy got triggered by some stuff, and um, we were out in public, at a restaurant, and we were actually sitting across the table from each other. I could just feel the energy coming from him. He was not speaking, he wasn't talking. I got up out of the chair and I moved myself around the table and sat down next to him, and I didn't do anything other than put my arm around the back of his chair. And I just loosely put my hand on his shoulder. And I didn't do anything else. I just came around and sat by him and hugged him. And within about 10, 15 minutes, whatever was going on for him, all of a sudden he started talking about it. And his whole energy shifted. And he came back to be a little more like my normal third house Pluto partner. Yuck, 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 yuck. Leroy knows the situation I'm specifically talking about. And so we'll do that back and forth with each other. And so this is something that is so simple, yet so profound and helpful for when you have this South Node in Cancer or fourth house. And it can be so helpful for them to become conscious of this, and then for them to recognize it and express it with their partner so that they learn to go back and forth this way, which is the opposite of what we are talking about on this screen, and being so, insecure that they're constantly triggering this back and forth with each other.
Kim.
Now, well, yes, sorry, go ahead.
Uh,
Yes.
you, could another example of this fourth house dynamic be a parent who wants their children to take care of them, wanting to make
Oh,
the child
totally.
their parent, but at the same time wanting to maintain some authority over that
Yep.
child as the
Mm-hmm.
parent, etc.? Yeah, this is a specific state question by one of the students here. I just thought, of course, that'd be one of the clear dynamics of this archetype, isn't it?
Yeah, it was what we had spoken about earlier, where the parent dominates. But if the parent has their own emotional needs displaced, they didn't have their needs met in childhood, which again is so common and so typical. If they didn't have their own emotional needs met and they didn't make the effort to heal that as an adult, then all that is projected onto the child. And you can have a parent that covertly manipulates and plays the child and wants the parent or wants the child to take care of the parent, but
Mm-hmm.
on the parents' terms, on the
Mm-hmm.
parents' terms,
Sure.
on their dominating terms.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm using some Pluto and Cancer examples here, but I think you're getting the archetype of what we're talking about. Leroy has two Pluto and Cancer parents. I have one. I have a mother, Pluto Leo. But his parents are in their 80s, and I'm thinking specifically of your mother, who is Pluto in Cancer
Mm-hmm.
and Pluto in the fourth house,
Mm-hmm.
in her early 80s, and being very subtle about how she wants her kids to do this, do that, do this, do that for her.
Mm-hmm.
Most of it, most of it, the doctor's appointments. You know, Sometimes she's very mature and will speak about it. Other times she sends these subtle, guilt-ridden texts for her children. And bless her 3 kids that live here in town, they're all mature enough to recognize what's going on. And they'll call her out. We had a calling out of mom this summer and over some stuff, and by God, when all 3 kids stood up to her, she shifted. She actually made some emotional changes. And so, same thing with South Noding Cancer or fourth house egos. You can have that parent dominate covertly, and it'll be the manipulations. It'll be childlike. And it's going to reflect their own emotional needs that were not still unmet. hmm Now, something else we look at here is many times South Noding Cancer or fourth house egos have switched genders in the last life or in most recent past lives, a lifetime or two ago. This is also a very common source for the emotional states and difficulties with internal security and self-image issues. Now, this is because in general, fourth house Cancer moon correlates to the anima animus dynamic on psychological and emotional levels. And so what this is telling us is that it's different to come in as a male versus a female. And when these egos do gender switches, it's very uncomfortable. Many of us will know these stories from EA. And so what we look at in general here is evolution is always going to require souls to experience the inherent polarities of male and female. And they are distinct differences. And so therefore, that psychological and emotional orientation will naturally be different relative to gender. We also have that natural evolutionary process of reincarnation that allows us to progressively learn how to unite both halves of ourselves into a total integration. In other words, we're learning to understand the inner male and inner female within our soul and to be able to integrate that regardless of which gender we happen to be coming through. Now, the opposite of that, the distortions, are going to be the extremes of all of this. It's going to be the denial of the gender they come in. I want to go back to that other gender. And isn't it interesting as we go through transiting Pluto in Capricorn and the squares of Uranus in Aries, we have all of the LBGT issues coming up and all of the transgender issues coming up. And we have that consensus backlash to being able to understand this. We don't have a societal acceptance of reincarnation. So therefore, we don't have an acceptance of that in consensus society. And so you can just see how from consensus to individuating to spirituating, how this in the consensus world, it's just, utter confusion or denial. And then as we are individuating and even moving into spirituating, how we start to understand this in such a broader scale. And it gets to the point where it's not even necessarily a big deal to us. And it really, again, everything is going to be emphasized on this with this ego structure. Here is where you find these gender switch symbols in general. Pluto 4th house Cancer, 10th house Capricorn. Nodal axis in 4th or 10th house, no matter where the south node is, it can be 4th or 10th. Nodal axis in Cancer, Capricorn. South node can be Cancer or Capricorn. Sometimes you also see it when there's a stellium of planets in 4th house, Cancer, 10th house, or Capricorn. Sometimes, not always, if there are stelliums of planets in the squares, 1st Aries, 7th Libra, you can even see it come through in those degrees as well. What we're going to have in general, and this will be emphasized with this ego structure, internal security linked to the gender may be hard to achieve when they've just come through the gender switching. The ego had lifetimes of being female, and it now comes through as a male. It can't relate to itself as being the male. It's the Jeffrey story with, a pair of blue jeans. They're stiff and uncomfortable the first time you wear them. As you wash and wear and wash and wear, they get more and more comfortable till finally they're threadbare, torn. They finally wear out and you can't wear them anymore. You gotta go get a new pair of blue jeans. That's how we will have a tendency to do gender switching, especially in consensus state. And for me, as I've observed us expanding into individuated and spirituated, it becomes easier and easier and easier to flip back and forth from gender to gender. I'm aware of being female my last lifetime, and I'm aware of being male the 2 lifetimes before that. And prior to that, I lose the specific memories of which lifetimes was what. And as we said, consensus conditioning many times just has no understanding of these gender issues, and they make it worse. They go to that Capricorn polarity extreme of judging and denial and suppression and punishment. You know, South Dakota was one of those states that actually had a bathroom law last year, and our governor refused to sign the bill into law. It happened about the same time that North Carolina did it. Now that we have President-elect Trump and everything that happened from the election, there's a big push to push this bathroom bill through our state legislature again. We'll see how it goes. I expect them to pass it again because we have such Republican-controlled legislature. I don't know. We had a governor last year who had never met a transgender person. So all the transgender people went to our state capitol and demanded meetings with him. And he sat down with a group of them, and it's what led him to not sign the bill. we'll see how it goes. I kind of expect him to sign it, unfortunately. And so what we have here is the hormones that come from gender switching as well create a source of emotional conflict. The hormones are literally different, testosterone versus estrogen. And if you make that gender switch and those bodies start producing the different hormones, we can't relate to it. I don't know how many of you saw the movie The Danish Girl. It was the first gender surgery that was done back in the 1930s. I won't tell you how the movie turned out, but I very, very much enjoyed that movie. I just liked the actor. What was it? Eddie Redmayne, I think. I liked him as an actor, and so I wanted to see the movie just for him, not so much the gender stuff. But it was a fascinating movie, and it was extremely well done. I really, really liked it, based on a true story. So if we have this ego structure and it's not the first lifetime since there was a gender switch, if it was the previous, 2 or 3, 4 lifetimes, then it starts to minimize some of the conflicts. It starts to minimize the emotional conflicts, even the hormonal conflicts as well. When, again, they've worn the blue jeans once, they've washed them, they wear them a second time, they wash them, it starts to become more comfortable. Oh, this is what it's like to be male or female. And of course, as we've been speaking, one or both parents can always come into this situation. You can have parents that, can accept a gay child. Or we can have parents who, in the case of my father, to some degree, he was a farmer and he had 3 girls. And I was the oldest of the 3 girls. I have a Capricorn rising. I was raised to be tough, and I'm emotionally as sensitive as they come. I didn't do very good with cruelty to the farm animals, but I learned how to put my big girl pants on and tough it up. And I thought I started driving at 12, and my father told me a few months ago, no, Kim, you were 10 years old when you started driving. So you can see the example there, that this can again be emphasized with this ego structure where the parents try to force the child to be a different gender than how they came through. They cannot understand all of the gender stuff. Leroy has some old family friends from his former neighborhood that his parents were very, very close to. They have 5 sons and 1 daughter. 2 of the sons turned out gay. And the one son, we see them every so often, and he's been in, God, how long have they been together? Something like 2.5 decades. He's been in a single relationship with another, gay person, and the family had all kinds of stuff and conflicts around it. And so one of these, the gay male that's been in the long-term relationship, he's the most financially responsible and emotionally mature out of the whole family. I have no idea what his chart is, but you get the point with how much trouble there can be with the parents not being able to accept the child for who they really are and doing their own projections on them as well. Now, most South Node in Cancer or 4th house egos will come in mistrustful and suspicious of others and their motives. The lack of trust is based upon them being deserted, or emotional upsets by others as when they were overly dependent upon them. Again, when these egos, if they're too dependent on someone else, they'll get that emotional rug ripped out from underneath them to force them back in upon themselves. One of our examples had his marriage partner die on him. That's the extreme example of having that rug ripped out underneath to push you back in upon yourself. And this lack of trust can also be based upon unconscious memories of the emotional rejections and or unavailability of the parent or parents. The lesson is to know and trust oneself, to internalize emotional security, because you really cannot know and trust another person until you can know and trust yourself. Sometimes the South Node in Cancer or Fourth House egos have learned these lessons of self-trust. This means they will have had prior life efforts to learn internalizing security, minimizing external dependency. They've had prior life acceptance of who they uniquely are on an emotional basis, their own self-image. I am who I am. They can also have a familial environment where one or both parents contributed on a positive level to their self-image and internal security. The parents did not allow this ego structure to be excessively dependent. They probably could recognize them for who they were. They gave them the emotional support they needed, but they didn't go overboard on it. They worked with them on that emotional independence when necessary. Sometimes it's not limited to individuated and spirituated. It would be more common to see it there, but it can be consensus as well. Sometimes this ego structure just doesn't get negatively impacted by any lack of parental support. In other words, they used the family to further their own evolutionary needs and lessons. I have Moon in the 10th house. I, went through my share of emotional upsets, especially in relationships, but I didn't have a father who could recognize me for who I was emotionally. And that lack of support just triggered me. I already showed you that example, but I'm going through this class. I'm like, there are so many situations in my family environment where that lack of support was that wake-up call for me emotionally and learning to meet my own emotional needs. Now, I better start speeding up here so we can get to both chart examples. North Node in Capricorn or 10th house here, the ego's lesson is to develop self-determination, self-responsibility, both internally and externally. This North Node ego structure needs to learn how to accept responsibility for their own actions, which lead to emotional maturity. I'm not a victim here. Why did this happen? What did it mean? What's my role in it? What is it for me to learn and do? We just accept responsibility for our world, regardless. This North Node ego structure is learning how to create their own world rather than be the victim of all these emotions and emotional winds. They're learning how to integrate and establish their own personal authority and individuality in any society or culture. In other words, they're not just going to stay stuck in their own little emotional cave of security that they've established in whatever way. They realize that they have got to be able to work out there in that outer world just as well as their inner world. And of course, this North Node in Capricorn or 10th house, there's lessons in learning to take charge of one's life in regards to work and career. I want to emotionally mature and be a fully functioning person in the world. Now, this does not mean that these ego structures have to work in an 8 to 5 world or that they have to have a career. The deeper thing underneath is that they just take charge of their life in whatever ways. They take charge of being an adult in their world. Now, the ego's evolutionary lesson, of course, is for the child to become an adult. North Node, Capricorn, 10th house. Responsibility for their life situation, regardless of what it is, rests with themselves. They can no longer blame the parents or the environment. Whatever parental environment they were born into was a necessary evolutionary condition to affect their own internal security and their own emotional self-reliance, self-fulfillment. They are learning to acknowledge and support a healthy adult child within. We all have one. And when they can mature and support their own inner child and help it mature, then they are able to be vulnerable and sensitive in a positive way. They learn to take that sensitivity and utilize it in healing ways in their environment, in their familial structure that they create, perhaps even healing in the one they were born into. So North Node and Capricorn or 10th house egos must learn to know and trust themselves in order to know and trust anyone else. They learn what's a safe environment, what's not a safe environment, and they honor that. And they remove themselves from environments that are not safe for their sensitive natures. Self-responsibility for their actions teaches these North Node egos to stop blaming anyone else for their self-created problems and life conditions. We're not a victim. This just didn't happen happenstance. What's my role in it? What's my role for changing it? Again, parents had a necessary role to play, and everyone has different strengths and weaknesses. It's not a right, wrong, good, bad. What can happen with the distortions of Capricorn in 10th house is those conditioned judgments that create conditioned guilt as well as that whole Virgo Pisces polarity. And so we're all different. And this is where I'm at. This is where someone else is at. This is what's here for me to do. This is what's there for them to do. There's just a maturing about themselves and the world in general and their life specifically. When we are looking at souls that are in the individuated and spirituated states of consciousness that have North Node in Capricorn or 10th house, this is where the ego realizes that these karmic issues and conditions need to be resolved. And whatever it's necessary to do to resolve it, they do. There is an ability to have an accelerated almost maturation process where North Node Capricorn 10th house consensus might go through 5 lifetimes to be responsible for themselves, or 50 lifetimes. Individuated and spirituated souls with these egos are going, okay, this is what I'm responsible for. This is what I need to do. And so they take on self-responsibility on an emotional level. Just that in itself is so maturing for these ego structures. North Node in Capricorn, 10th house egos, self-determination in work and career creates that counterpoint as a natural reflection upon the sources and origins of any feelings and emotions. The work environment, and when we go out there into the world, whether we're a volunteer on some social, situation, again, the outer world, it expects us to be an adult. And so it expects us to behave like an adult. And literally walking through that process, Earth, it allows the ego to gain personal knowledge about itself and what triggers it and why it feels this way and why we have these emotions and what we need to do to mature. It also will then allow this ego structure to develop the control and willpower over their emotions, moods, and feelings. All right, I know I'm being triggered, but I'm in this social situation and I just can't do an emotional meltdown. So they're, again, being out in that world, whether it's through work and career or, again, social positions, volunteer work, whatever. Just the nature of it is going to help us emotionally mature and take responsibility. So North Node in Capricorn or 10th house egos utilize reflection of the emotional causes to take charge of their own life versus being continually swept away by all of the emotional storms. It will create an evolving degree of emotional empathy with themselves and with others. And as this takes place, it allows this North Node ego structure to help others understand their own nature, their personal environments, their self-responsibilities. It will help these egos encourage self-determination in others. It will help others, they will help others understand the nature of their own emotional blocks or emotional displacements. Their North Node egos will help others minimize external dependencies as well. And this ego structure will help others achieve inner security and emotional self-reliance. So the evolving evolutionary states of consciousness in the soul, again, as we're looking more individuated, spirituated, then these North Node in Capricorn 10th house egos can achieve total and equal integration of their masculine and feminine components. They will balance the anima-animus dynamic. Regardless of which gender they come in, they honor their inner female, they honor their inner male. And both can be animated, however necessary, from situation to situation. And again, as we are evolving on a soul level, this ego structure will be able to identify whatever goals they have, and they will be able to achieve them via self-determination. That evolutionary process will allow them to take that self-determination, self-discipline, self-responsibility, all of the Capricorn 10th house words, and they'll be able to just go out there and create life on an emotionally self-reliant basis. That 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards of the cardinal archetypes is just always in motion for them. They're continuing, they're continuing to create, ever more broader levels of emotional self-reliance that then allows them to create ever more, you know, situations and goals out there in the world. Okay, I've gotten through the information here. Thank you all for bearing with me. We might go a little overboard today, getting started late. I have two volunteers. Let me just quickly see, is there any questions, anything I didn't cover? Um, any questions before we move on with chart examples?
None on the board, Kim.
All right, here. I'm going to start with, we have a female and a male example today. That's nice. We get both genders. And so as I typically do, I'm going to go put the chart up here. I'm going to point out a couple of things. I'm going to share some environmental conditionings. I'm going to try and do this as quickly as I can. And then I think we have both volunteers. We'll get feedback. And so our first example is going to have the South Node in Cancer. As you can see, it's 11th house here. We have and this one is Placidus houses, okay? This volunteer wants Placidus houses. So Pluto is first house, almost 30 degrees Virgo. We literally have a soul shifting from Pluto and Virgo to Pluto Libra generation when you are less than half a degree from changing signs. South Node, as you can see, is a balsamic conjunction to the Sun at 24 degrees Cancer. South Node's 26 Cancer. Ruler by sign Cancer is Moon over here, 4 degrees Libra in the second. Ruler by house, 11th house is Uranus over here. 14 degrees Libra in the second house. The two rulers of the South Node, same sign, same house, Moon, balsamic, Uranus. The North Node in Capricorn is over here in the fifth house. Ruler of North Node by sign is Saturn up in its own 10th house, conjunction to Venus in Gemini. Ruler of the North Node by house, Sun, is conjunct the South Node. So we have a ruler of the North Node being pulled back here. Quick memory. Planets conjunct South Node are going to have three possible conditions. Relive, fruition, or the third choice, usually the most common, a mixture of relive and fruition. So more on that. But this female feels that she is third individuated to maybe transitioning first spirituated. Um, Always had a very personal, emotional connection to the universe. She loves to be in, I love this, the woo-woo world that many of us all know. Uh, Wiccan, New Age, she found her first Wiccan bookstore at 14 and felt like she came home. Likes to do a lot of pagan traditions, crystals, energy workers, all that stuff the new agey metaphysical that we talk about, that in Jeffrey's later teachings he felt was, that stuff started third individuated, moving through and into first spirituated. Father was a lawyer, had his own practice, politically active Democrat in the Washington, D.C. area. Mom was a social worker, ended up working in the county mental health department. She was raised very liberal by both parents. She graduated from a liberal arts college, theater major. Grew up in the Northeast, lived out west, and lives in Southern California with husband. Again, there's been some church going, but she feels that she's more pagan Wiccan and finding her own way. Dad had a lot of anger issues, and she talked about how it was just pretty devastating for her. Again, if you remember, these south nodes in general are so emotionally sensitive, they're going to pick up on everything else. Again, both parents worked. She has two older brothers. She basically feels that she was alone and had to raise herself because of the parents always working. She's been married for quite a while, has two children, a boy and a girl. Uh, has always been upper middle class, but feels guilty around it, struggles with the issues of money, wealth, self-worth. Stay-at-home mom to the kids, although she's got a lot of creativity in her. There's a bit of a history of depression on and off, and she's recently been diagnosed with a fibromyalgia imbalance and has to deal with a lot of chronic pain and tiredness. So, briefly, again, I'm just going to fly through this, and I thank you all for understanding. We have a first house Pluto. As I always say, first house, as much as seventh house, is going to have a history of relationship lessening to learn. Look at this transitioning here again of Pluto, tail end of Virgo. I mean, this is a soul that really, really has to be shedding guilt and all of the distortions that come around that. And if by some chance there is a little more natural guilt to be atoned for, um, so be it. It will point itself out in her life pretty specifically, but it could be a lot of conditioned guilt coming off of this nodal structure here. Cancer, 11th house, just emotional triggers in childhood. How many lifetimes that just can freeze up this energy and or create her own anger. And it sounds like that anger was taken on by the father, which could have caused her to suppress her own anger until a certain amount or a certain age at her life. The rulers of this south node are new phase, the soul. These two rulers here in Libra's second house, this is going to emphasize the need to find her own self-reliance regardless of any relationship situations. And so it, coming through individuating and spirituating, there's going to be a faster ability to say, well, why did I create this early emotional environment? Why did I feel so rejected and alone? South Node Cancer, 11th house, they're just going to feel traumatized. They're going to feel like nobody understands them. It's going to feed into this first house Pluto. I'm all alone. This soul could have been surrounded by people. She had two parents and two siblings, okay? But there's still that essential feeling of aloneness. And I think what is really key here is with this Sun conjunction, she really had to experience the isolation and aloneness so that she could not project any emotions onto anybody else. It accelerated. Doesn't mean it was sweet and easy. It accelerated the emotional self-reliance process. It could accelerate that process of, I gotta love me. And even if she wasn't consciously aware of that as a child, to some level, Moon new phase Pluto, Uranus new phase Pluto, these rulers, it was sparking in her soul on deep levels that I've really got to learn my own self-love. And as time went by, as she matured, it became more and more that sparked in her and worked within her. Now, of course, she's got her own trauma and she has a memory or a regression experience of having at least one life burned at the stake as a witch. Imagine that, would you? Going on. Um, but so, yes, we've got all the traumas, and it could be that some of the slightest things that would happen in the environment, father's raging, maybe it wasn't that bad, but she had no objectivity early on to recognize that. So, in addition to, I really got to love myself, the slightest upsets were even more intensely felt with this signature right here because of the trauma of 11th house. And so she could have had vacillations between emotionally learning to take care of herself and time periods then where she could have been almost emotionally catatonic. Rulers in second house, just, that fixed earth of just, oh God, don't move, don't say anything, don't do anything. And it could literally just take a while then for this soul structure to kind of melt. And then when she did, she could just, almost, come unglued and the emotions just flooded out all over the place. She could also have various people in her life of a positive and or negative level with these two rulers in Libra that served as triggers to help her emotionally um, process and come unglued. Again, both positive and negative. The lessons here are relationships. And the lessons are to have deep, meaningful relationships, not escapism in relationships, not being a doormat for others in relationships. She said that she had a very early relationship with a triple Leo. Can you imagine how she could have just, that was the partner dominating her. But you don't want relationships in which you're the doormat. You want to evolve into deeply meaningful relationships. That's soul lessening. And then here's the ego of being able to crawl out of her shell and be uniquely who she is. Now, relive fruition. Always going back here to the emotional triggers, hopefully objectifying them to then move forward again on emotional levels and figure out who she is as a unique individual. And at some point in her life, to find her creativity again. There could be a lot of creativity, especially maybe around the paganism and all of the shamanistic work in which it's naturally there for her, but there's been lifetimes of trauma around it. So there is fear of coming out, and there is a delay, Capricorn process, as well as Sun conjunct South Node, delay of really unfolding creatively in her world. Some of it could literally be being a mother, which is exactly what she's doing. As life goes on then, and the children move on, she will probably provide to the children just by evolutionary state of consciousness and what she's experienced. She will be super sensitive to recognizing who her children are as unique souls. And she's got the tool of EA to also help her. Um, but as the children then mature, because if they grow up in a secure environment, they're going to move out. They're going to want to go out and create. At some point, it will be there for her to do her own creating. Ruler, Saturn, up in the 10th house, Venus, what's crawling out of her on an egoic basis, Venus, new phase, one of the rulers of the North Node, is how she is going to learn how to create her own ways with resources and providing for herself. I guess I would say, looking at the environmental conditionings for this volunteer, be gentle with yourself in the guilt around the resources and just be able to okay, this is just the way it is. I've earned it somehow, some way. I'm not aware of it, but the universe is providing for me. Now, how am I going to move forward in creativity in new ways? This is someone who I think will be creative later on in life, and it's okay. All right, more things I could say, but I'm just trying to be fast. North Node and Capricorn responsible with time. Leroy, did our volunteer by any chance make it on to the call? Can we unmute? I'd like her feedback. I'd like comments, questions from her or anybody else on the board.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, volunteer.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, you were pretty dead on with everything.
Okay, just fill in details. Give us feedback however you're being sparked to do so with that South Node.
Well, I can definitely say just back when in the beginning when you were talking about the dominating parent, definitely my father. I've had a big epiphany this summer, and I realized he's actually a triple Aries, and he was around a lot of verbal abuse as a child and was raised by a single mom in the 50s because his parents had an annulment because his mom and dad met, and then the dad went off to war and only came back to kind of get his mom pregnant with he and his younger brother. So he didn't really have a childhood. And so I think he's kind of always been pretty emotionally stunted. So I think I didn't even realize till this summer how much I kind of became the emotional mother for him. So he may have carried my anger, but I think he also just relied on me very heavily for that Cancerian mothering energy. And this summer, when I was finally able to distance myself from being sucked into our typical pattern of arguing in a good way, because he's a lawyer. He loves to argue. But he always likes to draw people in, and I would just, in a very conscious and nice way, say, no, I'm not going to play that game. And he literally would pout like a toddler. And it was crazy because he's, like 75. So, yeah, it was a really intense experience to finally, I guess, grow up and separate myself from him in that way.
I'm seeing transiting Uranus in Aries, squaring, your sun. And
Yeah.
next year, it's going to be squaring the nodes of your moon. So congratulations for really being able, because here's where transiting Uranus is, for really being able to recognize this and break a lot of the familial conditioning patterns. Would you say that your father was consensus?
No, he actually became a Quaker after he retired. So I think they're actually both at least spirituated, because my mom is a Scorpio, and she is definitely a very spiritual Scorpio. She's Christian, but it's a very liberal Christian denomination. They believed in evolution, so there you have it. But anyway, I feel like spiritually, they're both, because even though my dad was very preoccupied with making money and having a nice life, I think that came from growing up very, pretty poor. But he was always very active socially, as well as my mom. She was always volunteering for one committee or another to help kids, and my dad was always doing pro bono legal work, and just, he gave money to charities, and he also did a lot of political work, just helping support political candidates. So anyway, but so no, I don't think they're. I don't. I mean, I don't want this to come out wrong. I don't necessarily think they're as far along as I think I am. I mean, who knows? But they're not. I don't feel like they're consensus.
Sure. Listening, I would venture to guess maybe more along that third stage individuated.
Yeah.
They breaking and breaking free from that consensus world and just able to go out and create their own life. And so it's possible that, again, maybe some of the latter stages of individualization. However, as we all know, even in, the spirituated states, it doesn't mean we don't have familial wounding and emotional displacements due to so many thousands of years of patriarchal conditioning. Who of us, was raised in, perfect natural law? I don't think any of us are. But yeah. So how any comments from you with the Sun conjunct the South Node? I don't know how far along you are in your EA studies. So anything that you've been recognizing with this nodal axis structure through your own studies?
Well, I guess I don't know as much about um, study-wise, yeah, what that would mean, but just through just studying astrology and just through all my spiritual work, I remember when I first read about north nodes and south nodes, and obviously the general idea is you want to be moving more towards your north node, but because of my south node being conjunct the sun, I always felt like for me it was more of a balance. It was more of when to go to the north node and utilize that, but when to be in the south node. It's just I always know if I'm living too much in the south node because I'm either staying home and being a cancer recluse in my comfy house that I have made for myself, or have literally had the rug pulled out from under me emotionally, and at least three of my, well, and actually all of my emotional, my romantic relationships, or even some of my friendships. So I am a lot better at recognizing when I've kind of overstayed my welcome, so to speak, and when to start moving forward and back towards, start living back in that fifth house Capricorn North Node again.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, and you are correct. Whenever there is any planet conjunct the South Node, it's going to activate that South Node. It means there's something that we must go back and work through again. That's the relive part of it. And as we go back and work through it again, we can actually kind of kick in the fruition part of it. Oh, this is what I was supposed to do. This is what I needed to address. This is what I needed to work with. When it is the Sun conjunct the South Node in general, it's going to be, yes, creativity, but even more than that, it's going to be self-identification. We're talking Sun, solar, South Node of the Moon, lunar. I have to identify my own self-image. That's just Sun, South Node in general conjunct. And then if you put that in with, Cancer, it's going to emphasize all of the emotional healing and the emotional self-reliance and determining an emotional self-image you, Sun, that's unique to you, regardless of how anybody else operates. The 11th house is going to really help you detach emotionally when you need to. Yes, sometimes it's that good old rug ripped out underneath you, but it serves its purpose to you know, move you out of the intensity of the emotions sometimes to just kind of look down on them or again, objectify them and then come back into that emotional body again. Now, also with your nodal structure in general, one of the things that happens when we have South Node 11th, North Node 5th, and the Sun conjunction to the South Node in the 11th also emphasizes this, is all of the creativity that goes unacted upon. That late Pluto Virgo signature, you have to watch procrastinating creativity. And this is where from time to time, like you're correct. You're going to be pulled back to that South Node to emotionally heal or revisit time and time again. As you're doing that, what has to happen with time though is you have to act upon the creative ideas. You can't just figure out who you are. What are you going to do about who you are? Okay? And so that's why I had said, just this North Node when North Node's in Capricorn, sometimes that maturing is delayed. In your case, the maturing is the creative maturing. It's going out there and doing something for you rather than just being the wife and mother. Make sense?
Oh, totally. I've been wrestling with that with years. I mean, I knit, I quilt, I tie-dye, I batik. I mean, I pretty much if you can make it with any type of fiber or paper, I'm interested in it. So I really, but it's very hard because a lot of times I get so many ideas and then I get overwhelmed and it's hard to act on them. But I also really would like to have a business around my creativity, but it's very hard. I mean, now I know it's because with my kids, it's even though they're older, I still have to, get them, drive them everywhere. But since I'm the taxi driver now, but it's just, but I do feel really strongly pulled to do, I feel like, what am I called to do with all of this knitting and quilting? Am I meant to make political quilts? Am I meant to, especially with the elections, I'm very concerned with everything going on with Trump. I've been knitting pink pussy hats like crazy. If none of you Americans know what that is, look up the Pussy Hat Project, please. Anyway, but I would love to make some money for myself through my creativity, and I just haven't figured out how.
You understand the natural timing is when transiting Pluto opposes your Sun and crosses over your North Node.
Okay.
Okay, that's going to be your natural timing. And of course, 26-degree Capricorn North Node, the U.S. chart has natal Pluto at 27.5 Capricorn, so it's going to be right around 2021, 22. That's going to be when, through whatever ways, your soul is going to be pushed out creatively.
Okay. So that will come to me then. That's hopefully the solution.
And with the Uranus squares, just be comfortable with all of the chaos around creativity right now. Just instinctively follow the ideas and they'll coalesce and gel together into something when the transit of Pluto gets, again, opposes the Sun, crosses over North Node, 2021-22.
Okay.
All right, sweetie. Well, if you're okay, I'm probably going to move on to keep us on the time clock, but I really, really thank you for being a volunteer and hope this is helpful for you.
Oh my gosh, it's been super helpful, and it's just been so awesome to talk to you finally. I've been listening to the podcast since my son was 2, and he's now 10, so that's 8 years. So, and I have to actually, speaking of, go pick him up. So thank you, and
all right, and I'll see you at the Women's March, January 21st, okay? Bye-bye. Well, for those of you who don't know this, there is a women's march in Washington, D.C. the day after the inauguration, Saturday, January 21st. And so all across the U.S., actually all across the world, in major cities, there are these, it's the Women's March on Washington, WWW. WMW, excuse me, and they're popping up all across major cities. So Google it, you can find more information. All right, here's our mail chart. We have December 22nd, 1952, 2:34 p.m., Los Angeles, California. Here we have a fourth house Pluto retrograde at 23 Leo. South node is new phase. Mean motion of the nodes is retrograde. South node is new phase, this Pluto conjunction, but it's 23 to 13. I use wide orbs of 10 degrees. It's actually just 6 minutes beyond that 10-degree orb. And so to me, obviously, in most recent past lives or two, this soul actually had South Node conjunct Pluto. And there, he's just in process of moving beyond it. Definitely both of these chart examples, we didn't talk gender issues with the last one, but could be the case with either one of them. Might definitely be situation here. We'll hear from our volunteer and what he thinks. Ruler of the South Node, of course, in this chart example is the fourth house. Moon is up here, 19 degrees Pisces in the 11th. Ruler of the South Node by sign is Sun, which is over here in the 8th at 1 degree Capricorn. North Node is up here in the 10th house. As you can see, the South Node is conjunct close enough to the nadir. It's approaching it. North Node is moving towards the MC here. Ruler of North Node by house Saturn. Tail end of 52, 1953. This is a mini generation that had the Saturn-Neptune conjunctions in Libra. This is a mini generation of souls that have really been having to work through their de facto god goddess projections and idealizings onto partners. Okay, Libra. Ruler of the North Node by sign Aquarius is going to be Uranus here, which is retrograde at 17 degrees Cancer. We have a mini generation of Uranus in Cancer, which just in general also tells us that it could have either the early environment, one or both parents possibly could have been physically or emotionally unavailable, not supportive. This is someone who carries the trauma of emotional wounding, regardless of a South Node in the fourth house. Environmental conditionings quickly. First state spirituated. We have African American male here, oldest of 3 children. Baptist church, parents didn't go so much. Dad was into Alan Watts, mom into Jane Roberts Seth, so we could easily have another situation where we might have some individualization of parents here, like our earlier example. Parents divorced when this male was 16. Mom had severe mental depressions. He knows he's had past lives with both mom and dad. What was this? Both have 5-degree Capricorn Saturn, which is conjunct his mom and dad Saturns are both conjunct his sun. Middle class, since mid-40s have been more in the upper middle class, traveled extensively throughout the U.S. I'm guessing that's with his work, previous work in oil and gas industry. He is a data architect. moving through that, moving into astrology, married twice. This was the first person, his first wife died of a massive brain tumor, transiting Pluto in the seventh house. His dad died 2 weeks later. 4 children from that relationship, 3 of them bio. And he's been in a second relationship since 2011, helping his second wife raise her 2 younger boys. Looks like they're early teenagers. They're looking at relocating to the West Coast from Colorado as well. I met this male volunteer back in 2004 in Boulder when Jeffrey Green taught his last evolutionary astrology schools in segment 1, segment 2. So I've had the pleasure of knowing this soul since 2004. Because we have a volunteer who has studied evolutionary astrology for quite a while. I think he's on the call. I want to open the line up for him right away and just let him take it away with his chart. And I'm going to offer up commentary as I want to point things out for students just from the astrological archetypes perspective. And so, Leroy, do we have our volunteer?
Well, yes, he's on the call, but I think he called in via phone, and I'm not sure if he's enabled his muting or unmuting, or even if he's mic'd. I've been trying to chat with him, but have not connected yet. So, volunteer number 2, if you're, are you indeed mic'd? I don't see any option to unmute you, so I assume that you're just calling in a listen only. So, Kim, I don't think we'll have him feedback from our volunteer.
Okay, and that's fine. Sometimes when that happens, what we have going on is so he's not on the Q&A chat board, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, he can be. I tried to send him a message, but he didn't get it.
Sorry, my phone is just ringing off the wall. I apologize. I'm hiding my phone because I don't know if you guys can hear. I got it on vibrate because it's my clock. Sorry about that distraction.
What happens is, for everybody's edification, when you call in, we do have a call-in line as well with these webinars, okay? But you have to enter an audio pin, and his audio pin is #41#. He has not entered that. So if volunteer number 2 is listening, I'll just encourage you to, on your touch-tone phone, to enter that audio pin, and I think then I'll be able to unmute you and have you participate in the call, even over the telephone line. So again, remember, you have to enter that audio pin if you call in via telephone. Again, most of us now are on the computers and laptops, etc., using an earbuds or USB headset to interact and communicate with Kim Marie and myself.
Sure, and if our volunteer has the ability to call or to come to log on, you know, if you want to leave and come back on with a computer and a headset, you're welcome to try that as well.
Sure.
If we don't have our volunteer, as long as I don't have him at the live at the moment, I'll carry on. I'll start talking. I don't ever have much of a problem talking, do I, Leroy? And so, you know, again, obviously, we have the double signature here of not only Pluto the soul, but also the ego from the past, not only in the fourth house, also in Leo. We have the double signature going on. And Leroy, I got to mute myself and blow my nose. I'm sorry. I'll be right back, everybody.
Might be a good time to put in a plug for our upcoming forecasting webinar. We're going to have a Venus retrograde coming up, and that has been scheduled for February 27th. We're going to have a Venus retrograde forecasting webinar. So if anybody wants to save the date, make sure that you just kind of, most of you on this call, of course, are on our Astro newsletter list. So you'll get notifications of that, where you can enroll and participate with us for the live webinar. And just remember that you always get the PDF afterwards with all the audio and video links as well. So Venus retrograde coming up February 27th, live event online.
Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you for letting me do that. Okay, sorry about that. You know, here's the soul and its ego, you know, in the same archetypes, and so such a blending with that. Another planet coming off of being conjunct that south node. And some of Jeffrey's teachings would say that he would feel that I'm trying to remember this, and I think this is true for any planet conjunct the south node. Many times, but it's specific, but I know it's specifically true for Pluto. Many times these souls would be having to move through the past and clean it up, and they would be delayed from moving over to the polarity point until somewhere near that second Saturn return, which of course this person has been beyond for most recent few years, what, 5 years or so now? Unless there were mitigating factors. And mitigating factors, of course, would then be planets conjunct the North Node, which this soul in question has. So it can shorten that time period of the soul being able to actually liberate itself from the past, whatever it is, Leo 4th house, stay tuned, and move towards this 10th house of self-determination, self-reliance, taking charge of one's life. And if you will notice here, we have a pretty tight Mars-Pluto opposition, full phase, okay? Mars conscious desires, Pluto unconscious desires. Of any mitigating planets, the Mars one would be there. And we know from this soul's environmental conditioning that, you know, he may have, it's not to say he doesn't have career upsets that have went on, shock and trauma Aquarius, but this Mars opposition and even the Venus one, resources, you know, for the most part, this is someone who's been successful in career and has really been able to pull himself forward out there in the world. So that's some mitigating that goes on in this factor right here with the South Node moving away from this conjunction to the soul, Pluto. What I am sensing right here with this soul is there probably has been, and of course, you know, having 4 kids with someone and then having your spouse pass away on you, that's a pretty tough emotional trauma to move through. So how was this karmic with this other soul? um, you know, relive, fruition, extremes of codependency where she had to leave to help spark this soul really move into deeper layers of emotional self-reliance. What I want to say in general with both Node and Pluto in Leo, 4th house, is this soul's deep soul work and ego work from most recent past lives and moving into continuing in this life has been to go from the Leonian drama of all the emotions and really deepen emotional self-reliance. This will be reiterated by being the mini Uranus and Cancer generation. It's retrograde, really looking over to this 9th house, deeper picture emotionally. Also by the South Node 4th, the ruler moon over here, 19 Pisces, 11th house, another extremely emotionally sensitive being here. Quite possible that we can really be seeing the gender switching from female to male and For some reasons, karmically here, he's meant to continue that lessening of coming into the male body and having that animus. Is it animus that's the male? I get when I'm sometimes I get talking and I'm like having the male side to really take charge in that part of himself through any and all emotional upsets and traumas. There's an objectivity that's wanting to come through with this ruler here of being able, again, from this evolutionary state of consciousness, the soul is recognizing this stuff isn't random. No matter how deeply it hurts, no matter how shocking or upsetting it is, it doesn't happen random. What is it I'm to know here? What is it I'm to learn here? What is it I'm to emotionally mature with here? Those Pisces moons are some of the most sensitive moons on the planet. And yet when that moon signature matures, they can become some of the most emotionally wise souls on the planet. This is what's mine to learn emotionally. This is what's mine to do emotionally. One of my little generic phases for Pisces is absolute freedom requires absolute responsibility. It's Jeffrey's, saying there's no victimization on an ultimate level with Pisces. Well, there's the potential of this soul to be recognizing this deja vu. And then whatever happens moves through it. I'm seeming to remember that, a while back before the soul had reached a second marriage. Let's see here. The children um, there were three one boy, two girls, and I seem to remember there being some issues with raising the two girls and them rebelling against father, and it may have even moved into something in regards to living arrangements. I don't remember details anymore. Um, but the gist is the whole rebelling of the children, which would serve to have an effect to knock out ego, move this ego back to the soul on deep levels and say, what are the emotional lessons and healings that I am finishing up here with? And so I see this culmination for this soul of the ego really serving the soul and learning to do it on deep emotional levels as any and all emotional and egoic shocks move through, from the wife dying to the daughters being upset. You can imagine their own traumas with losing mother at, somewhat young ages. I think maybe they were early teenagers when that happened. You can also see between the first marriage and the second marriage, bio children and stepchildren, there's 6 kids. And he's now in a second relationship that, from my memories of conversations, is a pretty healthy, happy relationship, but he took on 2 young boys again. So he may have a lot of his own karma, biologically and stepchildren here, that again, finishing off the relive part of this as this south node moves on. What's mine to heal with these kids? What's mine to be responsible for with these kids? And in the midst of that, there's also possibly some objectivity here of, it's quite possible that there are some things that he is responsible with the children, and some things that perhaps he's not responsible with the children.
Kim, I
And
think we can
how
get some
can we?
feedback from Vernon when you're ready. Okay, I think we got him on.
Ah, yes. Do I
Okay.
have you? Hoping so. And
Can
so,
can you hear me now, Kim?
Oh, I can hear you, honey. Hi.
How you doing?
I'm doing good. How much have you heard about what I've been rattling on with?
Oh, I've just been listening. I've been listening. The system crashed, so I had to bring it back up.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, so I was just continuing to say, just in this latest moment of what were you responsible for with bio and stepchildren in regards to all of the emotional healing, and yet North Node and these two planets conjunct the North Node. There could also be a mixture of stuff that you are not responsible for with karmic and stepchildren or bio and karmic children, and having an objectivity to do what you need to do, but step back from what's not yours to do with the children. Would you agree?
Yes. The real thing was with my late wife Tony when she passed, and then my dad passed. Literally 2 weeks to the day after she did.
Mm-hmm.
Um, where once I got everything, went through that process of just dealing with the girls, and the girls were actually much younger than teenagers. Ashanti
Ah.
was 9, Makita was 7.
Oh gosh,
Um,
yeah.
okay, and so it was because I understood on another way. So some things occurred. I came across a card that Tony was going to give me because we had never really had a chance to talk before she passed.
Mm-hmm.
And what the card talked about, and how she looked at our relationship, was one that because of what I had done and I had given her, she could never repay. But what after that, because of what I was aware of, I said, okay, I know I agreed to this, but why? And so that's where I was for about 6 weeks. I would literally go to sleep, come out of deep sleep, and basically ask that question.
Mm-hmm.
And within about 6 weeks, I basically got my answer as far as past life karma stuff with Tony, what had gone on there, what had gone on in the male line of the family that I've been, and what I'd done as far as dealing with her and cleaning that up.
Mm-hmm.
And so that once I understood that, I was okay. I was still pissed, as you can well imagine, because I was
Mm-hmm.
36 when I met her, and there was no baby mama drama or any of that stuff. So, but
Mm-hmm.
then about 2 weeks later, I saw myself getting married again. I mean, it was almost that same process. And so that's when I said, okay, well, I will. And then the current lady, Cindy, that I'm married to, she happens to have the same exact birth date of my sister, who I love dearly. And we're, because of our age difference, our nodal structure is almost exactly the same, but she's a Cancer, and our charts are almost exactly opposite. She's also an 8th house sun, but her rising sign is Scorpio. So kind of like you and Leroy, we're almost, we have that opposition stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And she
Mm-hmm.
also has a Aquarius Mars as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
So your
that's,
first marriage was almost like karmic and fulfilling the karma.
oh yeah,
And mhm.
there's no question about that. None.
And second marriage was almost like fruition. So you had both the relive marriage and the fruition marriage that you've experienced with this South Node Pluto conjunction and the
Well,
Venus
even with,
balsamic Mars.
right, but even this marriage, as far as between Cindy and I, we both know, in a past life I was with her, but was separate. I had to leave. So this is almost like a picking up where that left off.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the other, for the other students that are on the phone, if you notice, I have a my 12th house Jupiter is square my nodal axis, which is the whole thing about dealing with faith. The other interesting thing, and I know you brought it up during your call, is when I attended Jeffrey's class in Boulder in 204, the transiting north node was exactly on that 12th house Jupiter.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, I remember you saying something. Yep.
Okay.
So was that when you discovered evolutionary astrology, was coming to the 04 school?
No, I had been aware since '86 of evolutionary astrology, and had actually done a session with Jeffrey, I think in '87, when he was on Vashon Island. But I hadn't. But because at that time, when you referred back to my career, I was really getting into my career as far as being in the IT industry, and so that had kind of gone on. I was still reading and still studying. I still have my original Pluto Volume 1 book that, highlighted, marked up everything. But it wasn't until it was when Tony passed that I really said, I really started to really wanting to study it, and then I wanted to go to a school, and that's when that's when I called Steve, because Jeffrey had been sick, and I knew it from his website. Jeffrey had been sick, and he hadn't been on. That's when I called Steve Forrest and said, "Hey, do you know what's going on?" And he said, "No, I know Jeffrey's doing better. And if you want to contact somebody, contact you."
Got it.
And that's when you said, "Hey, yes, Jeffrey was doing okay. He's going to be well enough to do the school in Boulder." And at that time, I was living in Denver. So.
Sure. Gotcha. So I want to point out also to students that North Node is new phase to Venus and Mars, but Venus is balsamic Mars. So just listening to, Vernon's history with relationships, both down here with this South Node Pluto conjunction and these relationship planets conjunct the North Node, both of these create this energy in which there can be the relive and fruition in intimate relationships. I mean, they're both, even though we would look, fourth, 10th to see so much of it being familial, these signatures also just bring in the whole intimacy signature as well. And so you can see the relationships created all or recreated all of these situations with the various children that have been taking place as well, finishing up, cleaning up relationships as best as possible, with each person working to be self-responsible, coming off of these old issues of the codependencies in the various ways. Excuse me. And, Jupiter square the nodes could also, there could be abandonment that's went on for you in relationships as well. Taurus, that's where I'm getting abandonment. You abandoning the relationships in past lives, they abandoning you in past lives. It could have went both directions, which was one of the things that fed the codependencies, attempts towards self-reliance in relationships, and that whole picture being part of the healing as well that's going on. Is that accurate?
I know for Tony and I, it was definitely that. As far as in our past life relationships. With Cindy, I think it was more because I think specifically it was the past life that I've been aware of, number just recently, which was roughly based upon what I've been able to kind of understand and sense, was roughly 1830 to 1890 in this country. It was probably around during the Civil War. I think I went off, of course, to join to fight for freedom. Because in that lifetime I was an African American male. Um, when you talk about the relive stuff, there, not beside the two ladies that I have married, there have been other relationships that I have been involved with that have definitely been karmic. I mean, and I've literally known stuff. One of them where I woke up next to a lady before I met Cindy, and literally woke up and said, "Oh, I know where I know you from," and it was from my first lifetime in this country, where I was betrayed in Africa, survived the Middle Passage, came to the United States through New York, and then was a slave for a while, and then fought on the side of the British because the British were offering slaves their freedom if they fought against the colonialists. So that's where, and she in that lifetime was a slave ship captain, and I had done a slave rebellion, and even though I had the rebellion was successful, but I had killed her out of anger, not in a defending way. And part of the thing I had to learn was you're not supposed to do that, no matter what. And so that's what that relationship was about. And then I also met the lady when I was actually killed. It was probably around the 1890s, somewhere in that time frame, where I was literally killed I was shot in the bed next to her, dragged out of the bed, hung, and castrated. And it was probably someplace in the South.
Yeah, not too fun. I have one of those lifetimes too.
Yeah. So that's, when you talk about being, the switching of male, not the last two. The last two I'm real familiar with, and and kind of have a sense of time frames, history, all of that. I do need, one of the things I want to do is I do want to go to Africa, because there's a couple places I need to go back and see if I'm correct about some stuff. And I also will be going over to Europe in April, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of responses I get, what kind of feelings I get going over there.
Yeah, let me point out to people, if we have any students who are wondering how, some of your descriptions that you've given in regards to being able to remember things in your dream world and be able to just have the intuitive hits come to you. It's Jupiter in the 12th house, okay, and Jupiter square these nodes, so the ego remembering past life information. Another signature where this can be coming from is Neptune in Libra. It's not necessarily everybody who has that Neptune in Libra generation, but it can be an indicator of having an ability to remember past life intimacy and the karma around that. And so those are where those two of those signatures, Moon in Pisces as well. Just in case I have any newer students who are wondering, how are you intuiting all this? Where's the signature showing up?
and also, Kim Marie, that especially that 12th house Jupiter, because it is in Taurus, which is an earth sign, and those things have come to me when I have gone to specific places. That the first time it happened is when I went into, as you mentioned, I've traveled around the United States, but it's primarily not been the oil and gas. It's because of my IT background. And when I went into New York, into the upper part of New Jersey, it was like, wait a minute. It was like I've kind of, it just felt familiar, and I couldn't figure out why until later when a program came on PBS as far as Africans in America, and they talked about a band of Africans who were on the side of the British who were fighting for their freedom. And I said, and when the guy talked about it on TV, he said, "Oh, now I know I was in that band." And I just knew.
Yeah. Another thing
Go ahead.
that just popped into my head listening to you that I just want to point out. Sometimes when you see Mars, Pluto in their harsh aspects, it can be an indicator of a soul who has had violence in their lives. And it doesn't necessarily so much mean it this lifetime can be, but like past life indications of violence or even violent, death. And obviously that's something you've been working your way through. And one more thing to point out too is, we have the South Node, fourth house, North Node, 10th house, fourth house, Pluto, planets in the fourth and the 10th. The Capricorn Cancer archetype can easily relate to African Americanism. It comes from the simple fact that a lot of the migration of Homo sapiens came out of northern Africa. Africa gets called the motherland of all humans, Cancer. There might be some geodetic stuff in there. I'm not real sharp with it right now at the moment, but the whole African thing and the whole slave thing has come to be related through the Capricorn Cancer. Think of the Capricorn side of it as, the authoritarianism, and where can we be more authoritarian than ever as a human being, but to have a master and a slave. So I just want to point that out for your planetary structures as well, to students. Comments, questions, anything else from your end or your perspective?
No. I mean, you kind of, for the students, I'm in the process of finishing up my segment 1. I've already done a lot of work with Steve Forrest on his stuff, and I'm in the process of finishing up here as far as the EA for segment 1. And I've also, given a couple of talks within the astrology world, one of them at NORWAC last year, dealing with the symbolism of the African slave ship.
Yeah, that's right. You've got that if anybody wants to go. And NORWAC, all of their materials, you can order their lectures from their website if you're interested in that. I had something else that flashed through and then it flashed right back out too fast. Oh, let me just kind of bring Leroy in for a moment. Anything from the chat board, Leroy, with questions from anybody?
No, we're pretty clear.
Pretty clear. Okay. All right. Well, I'm just going to try and be a little conscious of time, everybody. I thank you so much. Vernon, I thank you so much. It's nice to chat with you again, honey. And
Yeah.
so if we don't have any more, I'm going to move us on here. Let me get my slides going and say thank you all for being willing to stick around with class. Here's our next 2 classes up right here, second Tuesdays of the month. And of course, I'm going to do a Venus retrograde. I forgot the Pisces. Venus retrograde in Aries Pisces class, the Monday, February 27th. Mercury just retrograde. Well, here's the next one, everybody, as you can see. And then if I can get my act together with some projects I've got going on, I do want to start to move in on some planetary pairs. And so again, thank you to our 2 volunteers, and thank you to all of you who showed up at class. And have a great month. Stay warm, and we will see you next month. Adios, everyone.